Hi everyone, I'm Heather Wen, a retired nurse practitioner and the founder and practitioner at Arizona Healing Alternatives. On this channel you'll find several videos, what I like to call aha moments, where we'll be discussing issues that impact your health. So whether you decide to use Western medicine, alternative medicine, or even a mix of both, I'm passionate about you knowing what your options are. Oh my God, Heather, you are just so sensitive. You want to know how many times I heard that when I was growing up? And I just felt horrible about myself. Well, what's the difference between being sensitive and something called an HSP, or a highly sensitive person or personality? What's the difference? What is it? Does it mean I don't like constructive criticism? What does that mean? Well, the answer is no to that one. But we're going to talk about what that means. We're going to talk about where it came from. We're also going to talk about, well, what's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert? Because isn't that just an introvert? We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about men and women and the differences with that, and also the pros and cons of it. So stay tuned. So like I said, when I was growing up, I heard that phrase a lot about myself, and I thought there was something wrong with me. Well, what was so nice, and I didn't know this information until just recently, but I had been talking to people in my practice about it and helping people through this. In 1997, Elaine Aron actually was a psychologist and realized that there was something to people being highly sensitive, or what she called HSPs, highly sensitive personalities. And with that, she actually found that in some cases there's a genetic component to it, and in fact even in animals show that, and about 15 to 20% of the population has this sort of personality trait. It's not a disorder, it's not something, things like that, but basically what it is there are differences between somebody who is just, because you've heard people say, oh my gosh, this person's so sensitive, and I know I heard that growing up quite a bit. Well, what does all that stuff mean? It means that there are differences. Let's just talk first of all about the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. Okay, so there is this whole Myers-Briggs personality thing. I remember when I was at a nurse practitioner at a hospital, that they basically gave us all this test. And what it was designed to do was to help us all play in the same sandbox and get along really well with each other. Okay, so basically we all did this test. And while I tested into this extrovert category, barely, like a point or two in there. So I'm mostly introverted. Most people that meet me think that I'm pretty extroverted, but actually I'm more of an introvert. When it comes down to it, what does that mean? Introverts is like where you recharge, or where you get your energy from, or how do you feel more energized? That's probably a better way to put it. Well, for an extrovert, extroverts, now some introverts can be the life of the party too, okay? But in general, extroverts tend to be the ones that are outgoing and the life of the party, and they get energized by the group and the people around them. Introverts are the exact opposite. In those kind of crowds and stuff, that doesn't energize them, it tends to deplete them. And in fact, they need to be kind of on their own, calm environment and surroundings, and sometimes just alone, in order for them to recharge. And I tend to be more like that, where yes, I'm extroverted, I give presentations, I do things when I have to, but when I get home, the way I recharge is just kind of quiet, meditative, this sort of thing, and that helps to recharge me. And when we talk about introversion versus extrovert, being an introvert or an extrovert, in fact, for highly sensitive people, actually 30% are extroverts. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, you have this and you're an introvert. What's the difference between that and a highly sensitive person, or the sensitive? Well, in general, when people talk about sensitivity, that's different from somebody who can't accept constructive criticism, things like that. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is, in this HSP category, it ends up being, like I said, 15 to 20% of the population has this, where you almost have to sometimes withdraw in order to recharge. Some actually need like a quiet room, no stimulation. The way I equate it to, sort of, is when we're dealing with kids with autism, where their nervous system is kind of overloaded and it's too much. For someone who's highly sensitive, they can they absorb information differently from someone else. So they can sense things oftentimes that other people can't, which is what I discuss on my website under metaphysical and spiritual guidance. That they can sense things or know things or can feel other people's emotions. Okay, they can feel, what does that mean? Is that different from an empath? Well, an empath tends to want to share somebody else's stuff. So they don't necessarily take it on, but they want to share the burden. That's being empathic. And actually in this medicine, I have a correction for it, because oftentimes it's okay to feel for somebody, but to try to share it with them, then you rob them of where they need to be in order to really deal with it. But I digress. So when it comes to being empathic, like I said, is trying to share. Well, an HSP is not trying to share. An HSP can sense it in other people. Not that they want to share it, but they sense stuff that's going on that oftentimes people don't sense. And because of that, they can get overwhelmed really quickly. And so with that, like I said, the difference is that things can overwhelm more easily, and that person needs to retreat to kind of step back and allow their nervous system to recover from that. So when it comes to men and women, the harder part, I think, is a man that has this, because a man with this tends to be, we think of that as a woman's trait. Oh, well, everything bothers her, right? It's sort of accepted, not really, but sort of. But for men, it's even worse, because for men to be called sensitive, that should be a good thing. But oftentimes in our society, it really isn't celebrated, which is unfortunate. Oftentimes ask me, well, what's the difference between that and someone who's just totally defensive? Okay, well, the difference between that and defensive, which is actually a good question, is when somebody is sensitive to somebody else's emotions, things like that, that doesn't mean when that person comes to you, because let's say someone has something to say to me, like in my practice, if somebody says, oh, wait, Heather, I would like to do this instead of that, or I'd like to cover this today instead of that. A defensive person would go, oh, really? Well, I'm the expert at this, and you can just, sit back, and why are you not trusting me? That's more of a self-esteem issue, and that's more of being defensive and taking it personally. So we're not talking about somebody that everything that you say thinks that you're insulting them. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a person that senses something differently, and people will say, okay, well, I'm still confused by that. If you're confused by that, the thing I always recommend, and I've said this in my communication videos, is to perception check somebody. Right? Is to perception check and say, hey, what I heard you say was this. Was that constructive criticism, or did you mean it that way? What does that mean? I would always recommend perception checking, because it helps, because oftentimes people communicate in different styles. But for an HSP, it's more about sensing around. It's not defensiveness. It just has to do you absorb more of the environment around you. So if other people are even upset, or other people it's chaotic or whatever, you tend to feel that stuff. And that overloads the nervous system, which needs you to lead to retreat. So what in fact are the pros and cons to being an HSP? Okay, some of the really positive things. Well, let's first talk about the negative things. So the negative things are obviously when it comes down to that, when you're in a crowd, things like that, people tend to get overwhelmed with sights, sounds, smells even. Okay, smells, loud sounds, you name it. Anything in the environment can sometimes be just too much. I know for myself, when I'm in the office, if you look overhead, there's those fluorescent lights. Those really, really bother me. And I know that there have been some studies showing that fluorescent lights aren't the best anyway. But for me, I can't stand it. It bothers me. And that's why I like in my office kind of this low, relaxed, like soft white, regular light bulbs, because to me, it's more relaxing. So when it comes to that, there are things like that. Well, it doesn't mean that I don't like to go to a concert every now and then, because I love concerts. But it can so overstimulate me in the loudness of the concert, things like that, that when I come home, I really have to decompress. So for those of us that have that, that's one of the, cons to that, is that things can overwhelm pretty fast. And also we tend to undervalue ourselves. That's really, really big. If something with this personality type, you just don't tend to see your value oftentimes out in the world. And I think part of that is just because you feel so different. And there can be, I don't like to use a big word of discrimination, but they did use it in one of the articles, when it comes down to, because it's hard if you're only 15 to 20% of the population. Oftentimes people have a difficult time knowing what, and when you're trying to connect with people, it can be sort of difficult sometimes. We think so much, we're overthinkers. Not that people who don't have this aren't overthinkers or don't worry, but there's a tendency to worry more and overthink things more, which is why sometimes it's hard to make a decision. I know for myself, I have to weigh everything before I make an important decision, which I don't know, from my standpoint, I think everybody should do. But at the same time, sometimes that can get overwhelming if you're just not sure what you're supposed to do about something. So we can tend to overthink things, and that can be very, very difficult. Also, studies have shown that there can be more of a tendency to have things like anxiety, depression, this sort of thing, because you're overwhelmed a lot if you don't understand why you're wired the way you're wired. And I think that's half the battle. So let's go into the really positive things about this. Some of the really positive things about this are because we can tend to be, it doesn't mean that other people aren't compassionate, but you can tend to be more compassionate about what other people might be feeling and might be sensing and things like that. So that can be quite a positive, as well as when we get into stuff like music and that sort of thing, you can almost sink into a painting. Now, I don't have that, but with music, oh my goodness, when it comes to music, the way it feels in my body and the way I respond to it, I don't think I could live in a world without music. So we tend to enjoy things like tenfold when it comes down to stuff like that. Very sensitive. Also, because we're so over analytical and probably critical of ourselves, what we do is we tend to make great subjects for therapy and things like that. And I know when I would do regular psychotherapy when I was much younger, in my 20s and stuff, I tended to like soak it all in, then go do it and really analyze. Since we overanalyze, we also overanalyze ourselves. And so when it comes to that, we're very good at catching on to things and correcting things. So that's a really, really good positive trait. Another benefit, which is we tend to have a very exciting inner life, like very creative, like writers, things like this, musicians, stuff. We have this very creative inner world with lots of very, oftentimes vivid dreams. I know I'm a vivid dreamer. And we tend to have this very, very rich, exciting inner life, which is where we like to retreat when in fact we feel overwhelmed by the outside world. So those are all very, very positive things. And studies have shown that we tend to, when we're feeling safe and we're feeling comfortable, we tend to form very, very deep bonds with people. Much deeper, I guess they say, than the regular population, although I don't know how in the world they study that. But ultimately, we tend to bond with people very well, which you would think would be the opposite, because we need that downtime. One of the other, you can look at it as positive or negative, would be people with this personality tend to be more cautious than other people. So that doesn't mean that there aren't some of us that don't jump out of planes, but I'm not going to do that because that's going to be way overwhelming to my nervous system. So it doesn't mean that you wouldn't do more risk-taking activities, but in general, as these are all generalities, people with this personality tend to be much more cautious and much more thoughtful and think things through. And that can be positive, but it can also be negative because you can overanalyze yourself to death. I remember when I was a kid, I would think, oh my gosh, have I done everything wrong? I would almost analyze every single conversation I had with someone to see, oh my gosh, did I say something wrong? And that, fortunately, I got help with that, because boy, that would just drive you crazy all day long. And as a kid, it was really, really difficult. Part is, I know for myself, where I finally came in to accept that is what I'm doing today. Because I'm highly sensitive, that means that I can sense things and energies and stuff like that in people's body that other people probably can't. And there's other energies too in tapping into, to be able to use everything and all my senses and everything that I have in order to help somebody. So my goodness, I would hope, I remember being a women's healthcare nurse practitioner, I would hope if I'm doing your pelvic, you want me to be highly sensitive so that I don't hurt you. So that's what it comes down to. Well, how does it affect me as far as if somebody says something to me? Well, I was teased a lot when I was a kid, and that was really, really, really hard. I was very tall, and back then I had weight issues, all sorts of different things. And so that was really hard for me as a kid because I absorbed all that stuff. So what's so wonderful is being in the path of my wonderful spiritual teacher, Dr. Judith Larkin Reno, really helped with this. And I did a video that was called Thresholding, and that was a really helpful thing to me to kind of protect my energy field when I'm working, when I'm with other people, and that sort of thing. And just realizing that I need more downtime than probably a lot of other people do. And if you're curious as to whether you have this trait or not, I'm going to put up some little articles on it, which I thought were so helpful. And then I'm also going to put up, with those articles, there's a little test that you can take. And I think it's like 25, 26 questions, something like that. I will also post the links in the description part of this video so you can go directly to there as well. For this scale, what happens is when you check these off, you add them all up. And if you score over 14, most likely you have this HSP personality type. And for me, I think I scored 21 on it. So with that, it puts me into that category. Well, why is it important for any of us to know this? Because if you are living with somebody or you know somebody that has this, it's about realizing, not taking it personally, if that person needs personal time or time to recharge. And introverts sometimes need that as well. But it's about understanding and not taking that personally, because for some people, they have to like totally and completely withdraw from the environment. Fortunately, I don't have to do that. I just need to kind of take some me time, which is not a bad thing to do. So that being the case, it's kind of an interesting thing. It's interesting to know, because then it's important to realize that some people will take things much more personally and more deeply. And I know for myself, I can't watch like violent horror movies. I can't watch the news. I joke around with people that, I kind of have a little ostrich head in the sand, and that if something's going on in the world, please let me know, because if I watch the news, literally it so affects me that I am up all night being worried about everybody and worried about this and that. When they have those adoption things with animals, I am a huge animal lover, and the hardest part with me is when they show those ones about the animals being abused and donating. I can't watch those because I'll be calling, some people it's the shopping channel. For me, I would be calling in and trying to adopt every animal practically on the planet. And so, like you said, for everybody it's going to be individual. It's going to be different as to what the pros and cons are for you and to how you respond. Right. Oh, and by the way, when it comes to this personality type, please seek out help. Okay, we didn't cover that. So what's really important is with this personality type, knowing that about yourself hopefully is enough that you can feel better about yourself and find out what works for you to recharge, to do what you need to do. And hopefully it will help others, knowing if you have this, to express that to them so they don't take it personally if you need some personal time. That's the first thing. The second thing is seek out help. Traditional therapy and counseling and talking to somebody can help about that. And what I do, I help a lot of people realize the benefits of having this and how they can view things and see the world a little bit differently, and how to protect themselves with that thresholding technique that we talked about and things like that. So, and then also I have some corrections for it with emotional reprogramming, or what's called emotional erase. It's really kind of fascinating work. So that's what I do. But any way that you can feel better, whether it's traditional counseling, a different alternative method of emotional reprogramming, just simply talking to somebody, or just simply being alone in a quiet space, whatever you need, I sincerely hope that this video has helped with that. And now I hope it also helps the people who know us HSPs. I'm trying to say that 3 times fast. So if you like what you've seen, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. Also, you can hit the notification bell, and anytime videos come out of this kind, you'll be notified. Also, leave comments for me in the comments section. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. So when someone says to me now, oh my gosh, you are so sensitive, I'm like, you bet, and I'm thrilled that I am so sensitive, because it helps me out every day in my practice.